Hi, my name is David Horn, and I'm a double bass player here to demonstrate the differences between the German and the French bow. I'm primarily a German bow player, but I'm going to demonstrate both. So the major obvious differences between the French and German bow, the French bow and the German bow, is the stick. The stick of the French bow is pretty much straight like a violin, cello, or viola bow, and the German bow has more curve to it. Another major difference is the large frog on the German bow, a much larger frog compared to the French bow. Historically speaking, these have different role. They've played different roles and different origins, but the major difference is how the bows are held. I'll demonstrate first the German bow. This is called an underhand grip, and it's held with the thumb on the top, the pinky on the bottom, and the fingers connect to the stick on the side. And I'll just play some open strings so you can see it in action. The French bow is held in the style of a violin or a cello, with the fingers on top and the thumb goes into the frog. This is called an overhand grip. I spent a lot of time living in Germany and playing in German orchestras, and what I noticed is that amongst the German bow, there's very large variations in how Americans hold the bow, how Germans hold the bow, Viennese, Russians, Czech. So now I'm going to demonstrate some of the different bow holds of the German bow specifically. The American school of German bow playing tends to have the thumb directly on top of the stick, the pinky on the bottom, and these two fingers resting on the side of the stick. So it looks like this. When you have the thumb directly on the stick, the power of your shoulder and arm goes directly into the bow and can be very concise and accurate. That's the American grip, typically speaking. In Germany, like I said, there's so many multiple variations. One I saw is taking the thumb off the top of the stick and sliding it around so that the thumb is at a 90-degree angle. And it looks like this. The advantage of this grip is that when you get to the tip, when you're at the tip, it's a very comfortable position for the wrist to be. You can keep the bow at the proper angle in regards to the fingerboard, and your wrist isn't bent in an uncomfortable way. So whereas if you look at the American grip with the thumb on top, by the time you get to the tip, the wrist is in a bent and somewhat awkward position. In order to keep the bow at the proper angle, you have to bend the wrist very far. Now, the Viennese school of double bass playing, popularized by Ludwig Streicher, who is the biggest Viennese pedagogue, is somewhat different. It's sort of a mix of the German and American styles, and how he did it and how his students continue to do it is with these two fingers on the top of the stick and the thumb here. So what this looks like is this. This is, in my opinion, closer to the viola da gamba grip. Personally, I couldn't play like this, but Ludwig Streicher was an amazing bass player, and so are his students, so apparently it works. And now all these German bow grips have filtered throughout the various countries in Europe. So A lot of Russian musicians play German bow, and they tend to use either the striker grip or the German grip. I've seen everything there. So there's huge variations. Czech, all these people have studied either in Germany or Austria, and these grips are passed along. Another interesting thing to consider if you're trying to decide, if you're just starting the double bass and you're trying to decide whether to play the French bow or the German bow, if you're thinking about trying to get a job in an orchestra in Germany, do not play the French bow, because they will only accept the German bow. I think in all of Germany, in professional orchestras, there's maybe 5 professional French bow players. They're very specific that they like the sound of the German bow. They prefer the grip, the style, everything they find superior about the German bow, and they will not accept the French bow. On the other side of the coin, if you're thinking about moving to France and trying to get a job in the Paris Opera or Lyon, you can only play French bow. They're a little bit more accepting of the German bow, but still they find the French bow much more sensitive and sophisticated than the German bow. So these are things to consider if you find your professional path leading you to one country or another. Now in the States, it's completely mixed. If you go, for example, to the San Francisco Symphony, there's, I believe, 7 French bow players and 2 German bow players. Or if you go to the Chicago Symphony, you'll see French and German bow. There's a few orchestras that are classically French bow orchestras, like the Boston Symphony, the Philadelphia Orchestra, although they do now have some German bow. Now, practically speaking, there are many differences between the German and French bows in the styles of playing. Both have certain advantages, disadvantages, problems, solutions, and everything is a compromise, I think, on any instrument, but especially the double bass, because it's such a big, difficult instrument, in my opinion. For example, one problem that the German bow poses is playing on the low string, on the E string, or in this case, the C string. I find is that typically the arm can be stopped by the bass. So what I mean is, if you're not careful, there's very little clearance between your bow arm and the instrument. So you're always sort of having to scoot the bass around or tilt the bass or find a way, because with the French bow, you do not have this problem, because your arm is over the bass and over the stick, so there's always room, there's always clearance. So for me, playing the German bow, that's an adjustment I always find I have to make, and even after all the time that I've played, it's always tricky and a little bit uncomfortable, the E string or the C string. You have to make sure you're not hitting the edge of the bass. Now, the issue of string crossings is also, the technique is very different on the German bow and the French bow. On the German bow, I find it's a much larger movement to cross the strings. You're moving your whole arm starting from the shoulder. So it looks something like this. Even to cross between one string to another string, for example, the D to the G string, on the German bow is a large motion. And the French bow players that I've seen seem to have this motion a little bit smaller. So the issue of string crossing can be quite different. Another major difference between the French and German bow is the issue of articulation, bow strokes, off the string bow strokes. So some tend to be easier on the French bow, some tend to be easier and more natural on the German bow. Specifically speaking, I find that a slow spiccato, a slow tempo spiccato is very difficult, or very challenging on the German bow. For example, speaking of orchestra excerpts, the first movement of Mozart 39, you have to find something to do with the bow while it's in the air. So, for example, a slow tempo spiccato on the German bow would look like this. Now, what can happen on the German bow is that if it goes too high in the air, you're going to lose the sound. You're going to lose the punch. You're going to lose the projection. I feel like French bow has a way of getting into the string at these slower tempos that's more natural, that can just be, it's almost more like a marcato or martelé or closer to an on-the-string stroke, and they don't necessarily have to worry about the time spent in the air between the notes. And that, I think, is a clear advantage. So Mozart 39, first movement, even simple pieces like Eine kleine Nachtmusik from Mozart, or these slower tempos. And then once you get into faster tempos, the Bartered Bride Overture, or Mozart 35, these very fast sautier tends to be, I find, easier on the German bow. It's just a natural, very natural stroke. French bow, I find takes a little more control and is a little more challenging. Other differences that people have over the years pointed out is they say that the German bow is louder, it's more powerful, carries more, but yet has a less focused sound. French bow is more articulate, it's more accurate, has a better articulation, and that could be true, but I think it's all in the way you play it. Some people, for example, can tell right away if an audition takes place behind a screen. They can tell right away if someone's playing a German bow or a French bow. I find that a little hard to distinguish without looking, but some people can. So these are all things to consider when choosing the French or German bow. Thanks so much for watching. For Strings, I'm David Horn.